The last photo I sent my family showed my 7-year-old daughter asleep beneath a maze of tubes after emergency brain surgery. I typed only one sentence. "She keeps asking when you'll come." For almost a minute, no one replied. Then my mother finally answered. "Please don't turn this into our problem. We already have enough going on." A second message appeared before I could breathe, from my older brother. "And stop sending pictures like this. They're bad for the foundation's image." I stared at the screen until the words blurred. My daughter had survived 6 hours in the operating room. Half of her hair had been shaved away. The doctors still weren't sure whether she'd ever fully recover. The machines beside her bed beeped in slow, steady rhythms that sounded almost like borrowed time. I turned off my phone before she woke up, because I couldn't let the first thing she saw be me crying. 3 months later, the same two people who couldn't spare 10 minutes to visit a child in intensive care were standing on a brightly lit stage, accepting a humanitarian award for their unwavering devotion to children facing medical crises. The audience rose to its feet. The cameras flashed. Behind them, a giant screen displayed my daughter's smiling face beneath the words, "Hope begins with family." Then the host thanked my mother and brother for creating the campaign that had inspired thousands. They smiled, they waved, they accepted the applause. What they didn't know was that I'd spent the previous 92 days collecting every receipt, every email, every fundraising record, and both of the text messages they'd hoped I had already deleted. I wasn't there to interrupt the ceremony. I was there to let them finish. Because people willing to exploit a sick child almost always make the same mistake. They become so busy performing kindness, they forget someone has been quietly recording the truth. The first night after Lily's surgery, I learned that hospital rooms have their own kind of silence, not the peaceful kind, the kind that makes every heartbeat on a monitor sound louder than your own thoughts. The pediatric intensive care unit never really slept. Nurses whispered behind curtains. Ventilators hissed softly. Somewhere down the hallway another child cried, until exhaustion finally won. Lily lay curled beneath a mountain of white blankets, the right side of her head wrapped in thick bandages where surgeons had spent nearly 7 hours removing a congenital vascular malformation that had nearly ruptured without warning. Only 3 days earlier, she'd been practicing multiplication tables at our kitchen table. Now every doctor who walked into the room began with the same sentence. "We're cautiously optimistic." I came to hate those words. They meant nobody knew anything. I sat beside her bed with a notebook balanced across my knees. Not a diary, just a cheap spiral notebook I'd carried for years. Whenever something important happened, I wrote it down. Medication times, doctors' names, questions I needed answered, insurance reference numbers, phone calls, promises, anything. People laughed at the habit. My brother used to joke that I treated life like an audit. Maybe I did. Writing things down made frightening moments feel smaller. They couldn't disappear if they were on paper. Long before hospitals became part of our lives, my family had already decided what role I played. I was the dependable one, the daughter who never caused scenes, the sister who always adjusted her schedule when everyone else's plans mattered more. Whenever someone forgot my birthday, it's okay. Whenever holidays changed at the last minute because my brother had another public event, it's okay. Whenever I stayed late cleaning after family fundraisers while everyone else posed for photographs, it's okay. After 20 years, those two words stopped sounding like kindness. They became permission for everyone else to expect that I'd always carry whatever they dropped. Our family operated the Bright Horizons Children's Foundation. At least, that's what people believed. The newspapers usually featured my mother accepting awards beside oversized donation checks. My older brother, Andrew, loved standing in front of cameras, thanking sponsors, and promising that every child deserved hope. People called them inspiring, generous, selfless. Very few people ever noticed the woman sitting in the back corner of every fundraising meeting with a laptop full of budgets and folders full of receipts. That was me. I managed grant records, reviewed invoices, matched donations against expenditures, kept every financial report organized because charities survive on trust, and trust survives on details. I never wanted speeches. I preferred spreadsheets. People remembered faces. I remembered facts. When Lily became sick, I assumed, naively, that family would finally become more important than appearances. My mother hugged me in the emergency department waiting room, while surgeons prepared Lily for the operation. "We're here for you," she whispered. Andrew squeezed my shoulder. "Don't worry about the foundation. We'll handle everything." At the time, those words felt like relief. I didn't realize they were the beginning of something else entirely. The operation ended just after midnight. The neurosurgeon said Lily had survived. Recovery would take months, maybe longer. I thanked every nurse I could find. I called the people who genuinely cared. My daughter's teacher, my closest friend Nora, even Mrs. Alvarez, the elderly woman next door who insisted on feeding my cat whenever I worked late. One by one, they asked the same question. What does Lily need? Only my own family asked something different. My mother called the following morning, not to ask how Lily was feeling, not to ask whether I'd slept. Her first question was quiet, almost casual. "Have the local news stations heard about the surgery?" I frowned. "I don't know. We should be careful." "Careful about what?" There was a short pause. "The Foundation's annual children's campaign launches next week. We don't want unnecessary attention before everything is organized." I looked at Lily sleeping beneath layers of blankets. For the first time, something inside me felt unexpectedly cold. I told myself Mom was just stressed, that she didn't mean it the way it sounded. So I answered the way I always had. "It's okay," but for reasons I couldn't explain. Instead of closing my notebook, I wrote her exact words down. The next 3 days blurred together into a rhythm measured by medication schedules instead of clocks. Every 4 hours, nurses checked Lily's neurological responses. Every 6 hours, another specialist stopped by her room. Every morning, someone adjusted another IV line or changed another dressing. I stopped trying to remember what day it was. The only dates that mattered were the ones I wrote inside my notebook. Day 4, Lily smiled for the first time. Day 5, she managed 3 spoonfuls of applesauce. Day 6, she asked whether her stuffed rabbit had been lonely without her. Children have an extraordinary talent for worrying about everyone except themselves. Outside the hospital, life continued without asking my permission. The Foundation's annual campaign launched exactly as scheduled. Billboards appeared across the city, television stations covered the opening ceremony, social media filled with photographs of smiling volunteers, wearing matching blue shirts beneath a familiar slogan. "Every child deserves a chance." Normally, I helped organize every campaign. I reviewed vendor invoices, verified donor acknowledgments, approved spending reports. This year, no one asked me to review anything. At first, I assumed everyone was simply trying to reduce my workload. Then Grace called. Grace had worked in accounting for almost 18 years. She rarely gossiped, which meant when she sounded nervous, I listened. "I hope Lily's doing better. She's getting stronger. I'm glad." A pause followed, long enough to make me put down my coffee. "Emma, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Did you approve the new campaign materials?" "I haven't even seen them." Another silence. "I thought maybe you had." Something tightened inside my chest. "Why?" Grace lowered her voice. "Because your name isn't on any of the authorization forms." That had never happened before. Every campaign involving financial reporting required my approval. Not because I was important, because accuracy protected everyone. "Who signed instead?" "I probably shouldn't say over the phone." "Grace," she sighed quietly. "Your brother." The following afternoon, Lily finally fell into a deep sleep after physical therapy. I opened my laptop beside her hospital bed. One email, then another, then another. Nearly 200 unread messages waited inside my Foundation account. Most had already been answered. Not by me, by Andrew. He had quietly reassigned my responsibilities while I was living inside the pediatric ICU. No discussion, no meeting, no phone call, just done. Then I found the announcement, operational restructuring during family medical leave. The wording sounded compassionate, professional, temporary. According to the email, Andrew would oversee communications, fundraising approvals, financial coordination, and donor relations. Until Emma was emotionally ready to return. Emotionally ready, I read that phrase 3 times. Nobody had asked whether I was ready. They'd simply decided I wasn't. That evening, my mother visited the hospital carrying fresh flowers. She kissed Lily's forehead, held her tiny hand, asked about the latest scan results. For a moment, everything felt almost normal. Then she noticed my laptop. "You have been checking work?" A little. You shouldn't. I just wanted to know what was happening, she smiled gently. The foundation is under control. I saw Andrew reassign my responsibilities. Only temporarily. Without asking me. Emma. Her voice softened into the tone she'd used since I was a little girl. You have bigger things to worry about now. I've always handled financial oversight. And Andrew's handling it now. I wasn't even told. You would have only said yes anyway. Those words landed harder than she realized. Because she was right. For years, I probably would have. It's just until Lily gets better, she continued. The donors need stability. There isn't time for complicated conversations. I looked toward my sleeping daughter, then back at Mom. When were you planning to tell me? She hesitated. We thought it would upset you. No, they thought I would accept it. There was a difference. The next morning, Grace appeared quietly outside Lily's room, carrying 2 coffees. I was nearby, she said. I figured you hadn't eaten. She sat beside me without saying anything for almost a minute. Then she slid a thin folder across the table between us. I probably shouldn't have printed these. Inside were campaign expense summaries, authorization forms, vendor approvals. Every signature belonged to Andrew except one. At the bottom of the final page, my name appeared beneath a digital approval I had never given. I stared at it. Grace, I never signed this. I know. How do you know? She looked directly into my eyes. Because the timestamp says you approved it. She swallowed. At 2:17 last Tuesday. I didn't need to check my notebook. I already knew exactly where I had been. At 2:17 last Tuesday, I was standing outside an operating room praying my daughter would survive. For the first time, I stopped wondering whether my family had simply made decisions without me. I started wondering what else they were willing to do while they believed I was too distracted to notice. Lily came home 12 days after her surgery. The doctors called it a milestone. I called it terrifying. Hospitals have alarms, nurses, emergency buttons. At home, there was only me. Every morning began with medication. Every afternoon meant speech exercises. Every evening ended with another list of symptoms I hoped never to see again. Headache, blurred vision, confusion, seizures. I kept adding notes to the same spiral notebook, page after page. Dates, times, bills, phone calls, every promise anyone made. By then, the notebook was no longer helping me remember. It was teaching me to notice. A week later, the foundation held its biggest event of the year, the Bright Futures Children's Gala. For 12 years, I'd planned almost every detail. This year, I wasn't invited to the planning meetings, only to attend. You should let people support you, my mother said. It'll be good for Lily. I wanted to believe her, so despite everything, I put on a navy dress, arranged Lily's scarf carefully around the healing scar behind her ear, and drove to the convention center. The ballroom looked beautiful. Blue lights washed across the stage. Hundreds of guests filled the tables. Sponsors posed for photographs. Volunteers hurried between cameras carrying smiling children toward the front rows. Everyone kept telling each other the same sentence. This year's campaign is going to change lives. I hoped they were right. Halfway through dinner, the lights dimmed. Andrew walked onto the stage to thunderous applause. He looked perfectly at home beneath the spotlights. Tonight, he began, we celebrate the courage of children who fight battles most adults could never imagine. The audience applauded again. A video began playing across the enormous screen. Families, hospitals, doctors, children smiling through chemotherapy, parents holding tiny hands. Then, my breath caught. Lily appeared, sleeping. The photograph filled the entire ballroom. It was the same picture I had sent my family from the intensive care unit, the one with tubes across her face, the one I'd taken at 3 o'clock in the morning, because I thought grandparents deserved to know their granddaughter was alive. Around the room, people began wiping away tears. Andrew's voice continued. This brave little girl reminded all of us why our mission matters. My hands turned cold. I had never given anyone permission to use that photograph. Not the hospital, not the foundation, no one. The next image appeared, Lily smiling before surgery. Then another, Lily learning to walk again during physical therapy. Another, me asleep beside her hospital bed. I didn't even know those pictures existed. Someone had taken them while I wasn't looking. The final slide filled the screen. The Lily Hope Initiative, a new program to help children recover after life-saving surgery. The audience rose to its feet. People cried, donors applauded. Several television cameras zoomed toward Andrew. He smiled modestly. This program exists because one extraordinary family reminded us that no parent should ever face these moments alone. No parent. The irony almost took my breath away. My phone vibrated. Message from Nora. Are you watching the live stream? Everyone thinks the foundation created this because they've been with Lily every day. I looked around the ballroom. People were congratulating my mother, hugging Andrew, calling them heroes. Not one person knew they hadn't visited Lily once since she came home. Not one. As the applause slowly faded, Lily tugged gently on my sleeve. Her voice was still soft after the surgery. Mom? Yes, sweetheart. She looked toward the giant screen. Grandma loves me now. I felt something inside me break so quietly. No one else could have heard it. Before I could answer, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was my mother. She was sitting less than 20 feet away at the head table. Don't say anything tonight. This campaign could raise millions for children. Don't make it about yourself. I stared at the message, then slowly looked up. Across the ballroom. My mother smiled warmly for another photograph. For everyone else, she looked like the face of compassion. Only I knew that less than 3 weeks earlier, she'd answered a picture of that same little girl, lying in intensive care, with 7 words I would never forget. Please don't turn this into our problem. When we got home from the gala, Lily fell asleep before I even finished helping her into bed. She was exhausted. Too much noise, too many strangers. Too many people smiling at a little girl who still became dizzy if she stood up too quickly. I sat beside her until her breathing settled into its familiar rhythm. Then I walked downstairs. For the first time all day, I let myself cry. Not because they had used my daughter's photographs, not even because they'd accepted applause that belonged to someone else's pain. I cried because of one simple question. Grandma loves me now? Children always assume love follows attention. She had looked at that giant screen and believed she had finally become important enough. The following Monday, a courier delivered a large white envelope to my front door. The foundation's logo was embossed across the front. Inside sat a glossy presentation folder. Across the cover, elegant silver letters read, "The Lily Hope Initiative." My stomach tightened before I even opened it. The first pages described the campaign's remarkable success. Nearly $3 million pledged. Corporate sponsors, television interviews, new partnerships. Every page featured Lily's smiling face, sometimes with me cropped out, sometimes with Andrew, sometimes with my mother holding her hand during a hospital visit. That had lasted less than 4 minutes. History was already being edited. Near the back of the folder, another document waited. Unlike the others, this one wasn't designed for donors. Its title was painfully ordinary: Consent and Licensing Agreement. I kept reading. By signing, I would grant the foundation permanent rights to use Lily's name, her photographs, her medical story, future interviews, recordings, and all related personal narratives, for fundraising, promotional, educational, and commercial purposes. Permanent, irrevocable, worldwide. My hands slowly stopped turning the pages. Then I reached the final paragraph. The foundation would retain exclusive authority to approve any future public use of Lily's story. Exclusive authority. I read those 2 words again. They weren't asking permission to tell my daughter's story. They were asking me to give it away. Forever. Andrew called less than an hour later. I assume the package arrived. It did. What do you think? I think it's a contract. He laughed softly. It's an opportunity. For who? For Lily, for thousands of other families. This campaign could become national. I looked toward the living room. Lily sat on the carpet, carefully stacking colored blocks with the concentration only children possess. She had no idea strangers across the country already knew her face. You need my signature. It's just paperwork. No, I answered quietly. It's ownership. Silence. Then his voice changed. Emma, don't make this harder than it has to be. That evening, my mother came over carrying homemade soup. She acted as though nothing had happened, asked whether Lily had eaten, straightened a blanket across the sofa, then she placed the folder back onto the coffee table. You haven't signed. I've read it. And I'm not giving away my daughter's life. Mom sighed patiently. No one's taking anything away. The foundation simply needs consistent rights to tell the story. Our story, Lily's story, she corrected me gently. No. It belongs to the children we're helping. I stared at her. For years, I'd heard people twist words to make difficult choices sound noble. This was different. She wasn't asking me to share Lily's story. She was asking me to believe it no longer belonged to us. After she left, I opened my notebook. I wrote the date, the time, everything Andrew had said, everything Mom had said. Then I reached for the contract one last time. A small yellow sticky note slipped from between the pages, probably inserted by accident. Only 4 handwritten words, needs signed before audit. No signature, no explanation, just 4 hurried words. I looked back at the licensing agreement, then at the campaign reports, then at my notebook. For weeks, I'd been telling myself this was about publicity, fundraising, image, but suddenly, it felt like someone was rushing me toward a deadline I didn't understand. The next morning, Andrew appeared at my front door. He wasn't smiling. We really need that signature today. I looked him in the eye for what felt like the first time in years. Then, very calmly, I closed the folder and slid it back across the table. No. The word barely rose above a whisper, but somehow, it was the loudest thing I'd ever said to my family. As Andrew's expression hardened, my phone vibrated. A message from Grace. Don't sign anything. I found something you need to see. Oh. Grace refused to explain anything over the phone. Can you meet me? Now? The fewer people who know about this, the better. An hour later, after dropping Lily off with Nora, I drove to a small cafe across from the county courthouse. Grace was already waiting, looking as though she hadn't slept. A thick accordion folder rested on the chair beside her. When I sat down, she didn't reach for her coffee. She reached for the folder. I've worked at the foundation for 18 years. I know. I've never copied internal records before. She looked directly at me. I did this because if I didn't, I was afraid they'd disappear. A chill ran through me. She slid the first document across the table, campaign income. Every public donation matched the numbers announced at the gala. Nothing unusual. Then came the expense reports. Consulting fees, media contracts, brand strategy, executive communications. The numbers climbed higher with every page. I frowned. Why are we spending this much on marketing? Grace didn't answer. She simply handed me another document. A payment authorization approved by Andrew. Nearly $400,000 had been transferred to a communications firm called Northbridge Strategies. I've never heard of them. Neither had I, so I looked. She opened another folder. Corporate registration, business address, ownership records. The company had been incorporated only 4 months earlier. Its registered director wasn't Andrew. It wasn't my mother. It was someone named Evelyn Ross. I kept reading, then I stopped. The mailing address looked strangely familiar. Grace quietly turned another page. It's Andrew's home address. I looked up. He created a consulting company. He didn't put it in his own name. But the payments? I went there. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. The cafe suddenly felt much quieter. Grace slid one final document toward me. This is why they need your signature. It wasn't another financial report. It was next year's fundraising proposal. Across the cover appeared a title I'd never seen. The Lily Hope National Tour. Inside were plans for television interviews, book deals, corporate sponsorships, merchandise, documentary rights, speaking engagements. Every page treated Lily's recovery as though it were a permanent fundraising product. One paragraph had been highlighted. Parental consent required before expansion. Below it, someone had written in red ink, must obtain before compliance review. Compliance review, the words on Andrew's sticky note suddenly made sense. Needs signed before audit. They weren't rushing because they cared about children. They were racing against paperwork. I don't understand. I looked back at Grace. If they already launched the campaign, why do they suddenly need me? She answered quietly. Because one of the auditors asked who authorized the medical photographs. My heartbeat slowed, not faster, slower. And there isn't a signed consent form. They assumed you'd sign afterward. They've already spent the money. I closed my eyes. The campaign wasn't waiting for permission. It had already acted as though permission existed. Grace hesitated before reaching into the bottom of the folder. I almost didn't bring this. She handed me a printed email chain. Most of it discussed sponsorship packages, media schedules, nothing surprising, until the final message. From Andrew. Emma will come around. She always does. If she hesitates, remind her this is about helping children. She won't want to look selfish. No anger, no guilt, no hesitation, just certainty. For years, my family hadn't relied on my agreement. They'd relied on my predictability. It's okay. Those 2 words had solved every problem they'd ever created. Grace reached across the table and gently closed the folder. You know what frightened me the most? What? It wasn't the money, it wasn't the fake approvals. It was that everyone in the office believed you'd already agreed. I looked down at the notebook resting inside my handbag. Every promise, every date, every signature, every conversation. I'd spent years writing everything down because I was afraid I'd forget. Now I realized I'd been quietly building a timeline no one else even knew existed. As Grace stood to leave, she stopped beside the table. The auditors arrived next Tuesday. She held my gaze. If you're going to tell the truth, you have 6 days. For the first time since Lily's surgery, I wasn't thinking about defending myself. I was thinking about proving everything, and I knew exactly where I was going to start. The next 6 days became the quietest week of my life. I stopped arguing, stopped calling, stopped asking my mother why, stopped asking Andrew to explain. People mistake silence for surrender, sometimes. It's simply where preparation begins. Every evening after Lily fell asleep, I opened my notebook beside my laptop. 1 page became 2. 2 became 10. Every conversation went into a timeline. The ICU photograph, the gala, the unauthorized campaign, the forged approval, the licensing agreement, the missing consent forms. For the first time, I wasn't writing things down because I was overwhelmed. I was arranging evidence. Monday morning, Andrew called. His voice sounded cheerful again. Have you had time to think? I have. I'm glad. We're all on the same side here. I almost smiled. The people preparing to betray you nearly always describe themselves as being on your side. We've scheduled a press conference Friday morning. I saw. It'll be the official launch of the Lily Hope Initiative. I know. We'd love for you and Lily to be there. Love, interesting choice of word. I'll think about it. You don't need to say anything, you just need to smile. The line went quiet. Then he added one final sentence. It'll help everyone see we're still one family. After we hung up, I wrote his exact words beside the date. You just need to smile. Tuesday afternoon, I met Grace outside the county records office. She wasn't carrying accounting files this time. She carried a small cardboard archive box. I found these in storage. What are they? Board compliance files. We spent nearly 3 hours reading annual audits, privacy policies, medical consent requirements, insurance obligations. Buried inside one binder sat a document almost everyone else had overlooked. Child Medical Privacy Compliance Manual, page 14, large bold letters. No charitable campaign involving a minor's medical condition may begin before written consent from the legal guardian. Not recommended, required. Failure to comply could result in regulatory penalties, grant suspension, civil liability. I looked at Grace. So they broke their own policy. She nodded once, and they knew it. That evening, Nora came over with takeout after putting Lily to bed. She noticed the dining table immediately. Folders covered nearly every inch of it. Highlighters, sticky notes, printed emails, medical records, phone screenshots. You've turned your house into a law office. I guess I have. She picked up my notebook. I've never understood why you write everything down. I smiled faintly. My grandfather used to say memory changes. Paper doesn't. She looked at me for several long seconds. You know, I think they underestimated you. No, I answered quietly. They underestimated consistency. They thought evidence looked dramatic. Secret recordings, hidden cameras, anonymous witnesses. They never imagined the most dangerous thing in the room would be a mother who never threw away paperwork. Wednesday morning brought another surprise. A certified letter arrived from the foundation's attorneys. Not a lawsuit, not yet, a warning. The language sounded polite, professional. It reminded me that public criticism of the foundation could damage charitable operations. It suggested that inaccurate statements might expose me to legal consequences. The final paragraph caught my attention. We encourage all family members to resolve disagreements privately. Family, again. They kept hiding behind that word, as though sharing DNA erased responsibility, as though being related required silence. I folded the letter carefully, placed it inside another folder. Threats belonged in timelines too. Thursday afternoon, Lily sat beside me coloring butterflies while I organized the final stack of documents. She looked up unexpectedly. "Mom?" "Yes? Are Grandma and Uncle Andrew mad at us?" Children always ask the question adults are trying hardest to avoid. I put my pen down. "No, sweetheart. They're upset because we're telling the truth." She thought about that for a moment, then quietly asked, "Is telling the truth bad?" I reached over and brushed a loose strand of hair away from the scar that was slowly disappearing beneath new growth. "No, it can be scary, but it's never bad." She nodded as though that answer made perfect sense, then went back to coloring. Children recover from fear much faster than adults. Maybe because they haven't yet learned how often grown-ups hide behind complicated words. Friday arrived. The Foundation's press conference would begin at 10 o'clock. By 8:30, my dining room table was empty. Every document now rested inside 3 identical binders. One for the auditors, one for my attorney, one for me. I closed the final binder just as my phone buzzed. "Unknown number," I answered. "This is Emma," a calm voice responded. "Miss Carter?" "Yes. My name is Karen Lewis. I'm the lead compliance auditor assigned to the Bright Horizons Children's Foundation." My hand tightened around the phone. "I believe—" She paused briefly. "You requested a confidential meeting before today's public announcement." "I did. We're downstairs." I looked through the living room window. A gray sedan had just pulled into the driveway. Not reporters, not donors, not my family, people who only cared about facts. I picked up the 3 binders, then looked once toward Lily, who was laughing with Nora in the kitchen. For months, I'd been reacting to everyone else's decisions, not anymore. This time, they were walking into a meeting I had called. The conference room at Bright Horizons was already full when I arrived. Board members, major donors, 3 television crews waiting outside the glass walls. The compliance auditors sat together near the center of the table, their binders neatly stacked in front of them. Andrew looked completely relaxed. My mother greeted reporters with practiced warmth. To everyone watching, it looked like another successful milestone, another celebration of generosity. Exactly the story they'd spent months creating. At precisely 10 o'clock, Andrew stepped behind the podium. "Today," he announced, "we're proud to officially expand the Lily Hope Initiative, so no child ever has to face a medical crisis alone." Applause filled the room. Behind him, a massive screen displayed Lily's smiling face, beneath the words that had already appeared on billboards across the state. "Hope begins with family." I looked toward Lily. She sat quietly beside Nora in the second row, coloring inside a small notebook. She wasn't paying attention to the cameras. She was drawing butterflies, exactly as children should. Andrew smiled toward me. "Emma?" He extended one hand. "Would you like to say a few words as Lily's mother?" The room turned, every camera followed. He believed this was the safest moment of the morning. If I smiled, their story survived. If I became emotional, I'd look unstable. Either way, they thought they had already won. I stood slowly, without looking at the cameras. "I'd like to say a few words." Andrew nodded confidently and stepped aside. He still believed I was walking into the script he'd written. I placed my notebook on the podium, not dramatically, just gently enough that everyone could hear it land. "For weeks, I've been told this campaign exists because family shows up when children need them." I paused. "I agree." Then I turned toward the auditors. "Would you please stand?" 3 people rose from their seats. Confusion spread quietly through the room. I continued. "Before anyone donates another $1, I believe they deserve the complete story." Grace connected a small laptop to the projector. The giant screen went black. Then the first document appeared. Bright Horizons Child Medical Privacy Policy. Highlighted in yellow, written parental consent required before any public campaign involving a minor's medical condition. I looked toward the audience. "I never signed that consent." A murmur swept through the room. Andrew stepped forward immediately. "This is simply a misunderstanding." "It isn't." Grace pressed the remote again. The next slide appeared. The original consent form. Blank, unsigned, date field, empty. Another click. The licensing agreement they had mailed to me weeks later. The audience leaned forward. Someone in the back whispered, "They launched first." Another click. The sticky note. Needs signed before audit. No one applauded now. Andrew forced a smile. We were still completing paperwork. I nodded. I know. That's why I kept reading. Another document appeared. The campaign budget, beside it. Payments to Northbridge Strategies. Then the corporate registration, same mailing address as Andrew's home. The room became completely silent. One auditor quietly turned toward another and made a handwritten note. Andrew's confidence finally began to crack. My mother stood. Emma, please, we can discuss this privately. I looked at her for several long seconds, then shook my head. No, you asked me to keep everything private. When Lily was in intensive care, when the campaign started, when you used her photographs, when you asked me to sign afterward. I've already stayed quiet long enough. I reached into my notebook, pulled out 2 printed screenshots. Nothing more, just 2 text messages. I handed copies to each auditor before placing the originals beneath the document camera. The screen filled with my mother's message. Please don't turn this into our problem. We already have enough going on. Another click, Andrew's reply. Stop sending pictures like this. They're bad for the foundation's image. For several seconds, nobody moved. The photographs beside those messages showed the exact same child lying unconscious after brain surgery. The contrast required no explanation. One donor quietly removed the foundation pledge form from in front of him. Another lowered her eyes. A reporter stopped typing. Andrew reached for the microphone. Those messages are being taken out of context. I looked at him calmly. Then give us the context. He opened his mouth, closed it again. My mother tried instead. We were under enormous pressure. From what? I asked softly. The campaign. No one spoke because that was the problem. The campaign had mattered more than the child, and everyone in the room finally understood it. The lead compliance auditor stood. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't accuse anyone, she simply addressed the board. Based on the documents presented today, this campaign appears to have proceeded without legally required parental authorization. She closed her binder. We are immediately suspending all fundraising activity pending formal investigation. Another auditor added, we're also freezing distribution of campaign materials effective today. Gasps spread through the room. One television producer quietly lowered his headset. Another camera kept rolling. No one wanted to miss what happened next. Andrew looked around the room searching for support. There wasn't any. The people who had applauded him only minutes earlier were now reading documents instead of looking at him. He turned toward me. You've destroyed everything. I shook my head. No, you did. You just expected me to keep saying. I stopped, looked briefly toward Lily, then back at him. It's okay. For the first time in my entire life, I didn't. And somehow, that single decision changed everything. The investigation lasted almost 7 months. Not because the truth was complicated, because real accountability rarely happens as quickly as public outrage. The foundation suspended the entire Lily Hope initiative within 24 hours. Every brochure disappeared, every billboard came down, the website went dark. Families who had donated received letters explaining that the campaign was under independent review. For the first time since Lily's surgery, no one was using her face to ask strangers for money. Andrew resigned before the board could vote. The official statement described it as stepping aside during the investigation. The final report used different words. Unauthorized use of a minor's medical records, failure to obtain legal consent, financial conflicts of interest, governance violations. He lost his position. Several corporate sponsors withdrew permanently. The foundation survived, but only because dozens of honest employees refused to let one family's choices destroy years of genuine work. Grace became interim financial director. Nobody applauded. She simply went back to balancing the books exactly the way she always had. My mother called every week for almost 2 months. Sometimes she left voicemails, sometimes handwritten letters appeared in my mailbox. Every apology sounded sincere. Every apology also ended with the same request. We have to become a family again. For years, those words would have been enough. Now, I understood something I hadn't known before. Being related and being safe are not the same thing. I never stopped loving my mother, but love no longer required me to ignore what she had done. Some distances aren't built from anger, they're built from wisdom. Lily continued getting stronger. The scar beneath her hair slowly disappeared as new curls grew back. Her speech became clearer, her balance returned. One rainy afternoon, nearly a year after the surgery, She raced across the playground so quickly that I instinctively started running after her. She laughed. "I'm okay, Mom." I stopped. Then laughed too. She was. For the first time in a long time. She really was. The notebook stayed with me, not because I expected another betrayal, because it reminded me of something important. Truth doesn't become valuable only after someone lies. Truth matters because one day, you may need to remember who you were before other people started rewriting your story. The final page remained blank for months, until one evening Lily climbed onto the couch beside me carrying a box of crayons. She opened the notebook. "Can I draw in this one?" I smiled. "I think it's time." She drew our little house, a big yellow sun, a crooked orange cat that looked nothing like ours. Then she added 4 stick figures. Me, herself, Nora, Grace. I looked at the picture. "What about Grandma?" Lily thought quietly for a moment, then asked, "Can family be people who stay?" I felt my throat tighten. "Yes, they can." She nodded as though the answer had always been obvious. Then she wrote one sentence beneath the drawing in careful 7-year-old handwriting. "Family comes when you're scared." I stared at those words for a long time, because they said everything I'd spent a year trying to understand. Sometimes people ask whether I regret exposing my own family. I always give the same answer: no. I regret that my daughter ever had to wonder whether she mattered enough for people to show up. Those are 2 very different things. The day she went into surgery, I kept telling her everything would be okay. Today, I teach her something different. Some things are not okay. Being ignored is not okay. Having your voice taken away is not okay. Watching someone profit from your pain is not okay. And protecting the truth, even when it costs you people you love, is always okay. Because the family that changed our lives forever wasn't the one we were born into. It was the one that walked into the hospital room, sat beside a frightened little girl, and never once asked whether anyone was watching.